Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of Tales from the Fandom. This is the year of 2021, and hopefully the return of more of these episodes. I am doing a book trek episode, and I have a returning guest. I'm so excited to have her back. Eden Royce is back, and we are going to talk about her book, Root Magic. If you don't know who Eden is, she is a member of the Gullah-Geechee Nation. She's had short stories appeared in various print and online publications. She is the recipient of the Speculative Literature Foundation's Diverse Worlds Grant. And the book that we are talking about today, Root Magic, is her first book, and it is literally in my hands, physical copy. I got to thumb through the pages as I read it, which was wonderful. And Eden, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. How are you?
I am doing good. It's been a while since we talked. I think we clocked it in about 3 or 4 years now. Although, on Facebook we send messages back and forth,
Yep.
but
That is a long time.
it is a long time. But the time has obviously paid off because not only do I get to have your words on my Kindle with other stuff that you've written, but your first book is in my hands. Like I could use it for so many different purposes besides reading, but reading is its number one purpose.
Use it to, prop open a door or something like that.
I could use it for if somebody tried to invade my house, I'd be like, "Chow, get them."
It's a sizable book. They'd probably be at least a little bit daunted if you decided to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not as hefty as some of the other ones, but I think it's got a nice fit. I like the color on it. I don't know who did the artwork, but I'd like to make sure that the cover art is amazing. I love looking at it. It's just there's a lot to look at, and it makes me feel things. So, and obviously the words on the inside make me feel more.
Excellent. The cover art, if you would like me to go ahead and do that plug now, was
Sure.
done by the amazing Jen Bricking. I believe she's on Twitter at jbricking, but I think she did a beautiful job, and the detail is gorgeous, and you can even see my name reflected in the water at the bottom of the drawing. So I think it's just really beautifully done.
I didn't even catch that. That is so cool. That's so cool. Now we go back. You're one of the few people on the podcast of the people that I've recorded with that we actually know each other.
Yes.
Which I like. That's super cool. It's one of the cool things of not only Eden knows me before I even did Wackadoodle podcasts and having people on, and I find it just so cool that we have that relationship before podcast stuff and author. You were writing back then, but it wasn't until I think after I had moved away that you had started putting your work out there.
Yes, and we go back to Friday night Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game nights.
Yes, and you'd bring desserts, very tasty treats.
I would occasionally bring desserts. So, that goes back 10 years now?
Yeah, because nope. Let's see here. Hold on. 2010 probably. So yeah, 11 years, give or take.
Wow.
But I'm so happy for you. I know that it's been a long time coming. You've had a number of things coming up of different opportunities and different pieces, whether it's in the anthologies that you've written for or different projects you've been a part of. Mm-hmm. But I just smacked your book. You have a book.
I have a physical book now, and it is such a. You're right. It was a long journey, but here we are. It's my debut novel, and I'm sure we'll get into it, the journey to get here. But it's still an amazing moment. I'm still in shock about it.
Well, I'm happy to have it. We are recording January 18th. Your book has been out, I believe, 2 weeks at this point.
Yes.
January 5th. So, 2 weeks, give or take. Math is hard. Yeah, we're close enough to I can safely say 2 weeks. And by the time this episode comes out, it'll be about 3 weeks. You can get this book on I know it's on Amazon. I know that there's a Kindle version. I'm pretty sure you can pick it up at your local bookstore safely, please, or get it online from a local bookstore if that's something that they do.
Yes, you can also get it directly from the publisher at harpercollins.com. And you can also get it at indiebound.org as well. And there's a lovely little search feature that IndieBound has where you can put in your zip code and it will tell you your closest physical indie bookshop if you want to get out
Ooh,
there safely.
that is pretty neat because that way you're supporting the local independent booksellers rather
Absolutely.
than the big box. Very neat. Now, root magic, just very briefly, from my thing, my spiel is that it said 1963 in South Carolina, and you have a wonderful family, and it starts off with a funeral for their grandmother Gran, and the Turners are here, and you've got like the mom and then the twins, Jay and Jezebel, and then their grandfather Doc. Um,
Yeah, they're
and
yeah, they're Uncle Doc.
Uncle Doc, I am so sorry,
No
Uncle
worries.
Doc. I I love the book. I love what it is. But for those who want a better description of what I'm saying, I would love if you could just blurb it or talk about what people are going to get from this book.
What they're going to get from this book is the story of 11-year-old twins who are Gullah-Geechee people, like I am, from the one of the sea islands right off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. They begin to, on their 11th birthday, learn root work, which is a traditional African American folk magic and healing practice. And once they begin to learn root work, which their Uncle Doc teaches them, it starts to open up lots of things. It opens them up to the spirit world. It opens them up to, or it opens Jez up to bullying from classmates that really don't have a good understanding of what root work is and what it means. And it opens them up to realizing that they are connected to, through this folk magic, to their ancestors who have practiced this magic for centuries before them. So it's a way of them sort of connecting to their ancestry, but also realizing their own personal power in dealing with a lot of the challenges that happen in the book, whether it's racism, school integration. There's lots of other historical elements that actually happen in the book that both of the kids have to deal with. So that's what you'd find in those pages.
And it is good pages, good story. One of the things that I love, and it's through you because I believe it wasn't something that I think we talked about at our Friday night D&D, but I know we talked about it on the podcast that we've recorded before about your background as Gullah-Geechee and from that history of your like learning to cook with your grandmother
Mhm.
and like those stories. As I was reading it, it was definitely something where I could visualize like the way that you write and the stories that we have talked about is definitely easy to visualize, to smell, to taste, to feel that like what was going on in the book or what was going on in the nature outside or the feeling of them running in like the marsh areas or walking down those like the school roads. Like it's stuff where it's super easy to visualize. You make it easy for the reader to do that, uh, but it's also that we've got that background of I've heard your stories before and it's just like I can feel your influence like directly into like putting some of like your family into these characters.
Oh, absolutely. That's part of the inspiration for the book is my own family and the stories that I heard from my family when I was growing up. And when I read and choose books, and certainly when I was the age of the kids in the book, I didn't have a lot of books to read that referenced my personal background. And I wanted to write one, and I wanted to write one for kids because I think that it's important for kids at a young age to see themselves reflected in books, because I think kids are incredibly impressionable. And at an early age, you form this sense of what can happen and what you can be and what you can accomplish and what you can do. And I think that kids at a really young age, they need to feel like they're capable of lots of things, and they need to feel like they have a strength and a power that's all their own. And I wanted to give that to these two young Gullah-Geechee kids.
Now, the book, it has the root magic is rooted in Gullah-Geechee. It's not something that I imagine a lot of people are familiar with. You had mentioned it when we've talked before, and then I know that W. Kamau Bell did an episode on United Shades of America
Yes.
about the Gullah-Geechee. But for those who are listening and they are not familiar with it, what is Gullah-Geechee?
Gullah-Geechee people are descended from the original enslaved Africans brought from West Africa and West Central Africa through the transatlantic slave trade to the what is now called the Gullah-Geechee corridor, which extends from basically Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. And we were incredibly insular even after um, Emancipation, Juneteenth, and people fled that part of the world for northern cities, western cities. But Gullah-Geechee people stayed very insular, either on sea islands or very close to coastal towns where there wasn't a lot of outside influences. So we've held on to a lot of those West African and West Central African traditions in our food, in our music, in our mythology, and in our folklore, and in lots of our traditions, whether they're funeral traditions or familial traditions. So we are a people who, within a people essentially. So we're able to now call ourselves a Gullah-Geechee nation because we were granted nation status. I believe it was, probably 25, 30 years ago now.
And part of those traditions, and obvious through the book title, root magic is, and you've mentioned it, is root work.
Yes, root work, which is um, an African American folk magic and healing tradition. Sometimes it's called hoodoo, Southern conjure, but I've decided to use a very Gullah-Geechee term, a very South Carolina term, which is root or root work.
What is root work? Because there has been a number, and we were talking about it before we started recording, is that a lot of people have the misconception of what it is or could be because of media, movies and books and
Mm-hmm.
shows that definitely portray it. In fact, I remember there was a movie that I watched years ago and they had mentioned hoodoo, and that's the one thing that stuck with me was hoodoo, like that word combined with the movie and how it was portrayed. I was like, oh, okay, it's kind of similar to like quote unquote like black magic, but the way that you represent it is entirely different.
Well, it's entirely different because I'm from that tradition. I'm from a family that practiced root work, and people who are outside the culture have a tendency to, as an outsider looking in, pull apart and take bits and pieces that they want to use and typically portray them as negative. And I wrote an article about this a while ago, misconceptions about Southern conjure magic, but it stems back from when we were enslaved peoples and we're brought from our various countries, probably over 20 different countries in Western and West Central Africa, and brought to a brand new country where we didn't all share the same language. We certainly didn't share the language of our enslavers. So, in order to try and preserve a piece of yourself, preserve a piece of your history, to even practice the things that you usually do, whether it's certain ways of cooking food, certain ways of traditional herbal medicines, certain ways of worship and religion. Those things were, I won't even use the word discouraged, but you weren't allowed to do them as enslaved people. You know, there were punishments, whippings, beatings, killings, because those practices that we knew were considered evil and outside of the right thing to do. They were seen as pagan, and they were seen as more detrimental to society, even. And in order to even practice them, we had to do those practices in a clandestine manner. You had to hide to do them. And anytime you have to hide to do something, when people sort of spy on you or look or watch, they see it as a negative thing because, you know, why are you hiding? And you're hiding to escape this retribution that you'd feel and endure, because what you're doing is something that's is seen as not the right thing. It's not what is traditionally practiced, and it's not what we want you to practice. We want you to take on what we tell you to do. We want you to take on this religion. We want you to take on this way of life. So those people who decided to hold on to those traditions and keep them, they had to hide to do so. So people will see that as a negative thing, when really it was a way of survival. And that's what root work is. It's a way of survival and protecting yourself and those you love from harm. And it's based in those and rooted in those African traditions. But a lot of times in media, you see it portrayed the same thing with voodoo and Santeria. It's portrayed as negative things. Lots of Native American practices, those people outside the culture want to pick and choose the things that they feel comfortable with to use and incorporate. And those other parts of it that they feel uncomfortable with, then those are slated off as not worthy and not worthwhile. And I think that's something that I address in root magic. When you decide to embrace a culture or you embrace a practice, you have to actually take the good with the bad and learn about all of it, whether you decide to practice all of it or not.
Hmm.
As one of the characters in the book, Jezebel, makes a decision, at least you are informed of the reasoning, and you're informed of, you know, the background and the understanding. It's similar to, you know, you see people go on these culinary shows and cooking shows and try to do really exotic, out of the box things when they don't have a foundation of how to do basic things, and or basic cooking skills. And it typically doesn't work out well, because you learn the foundations of how to do something first before you decide to go off on your own and do different things, and different ingredients, or make substitutions, or decide what you want to incorporate into your own practice and what you want to uh, leave on the shelf.
Hmm. That was definitely represented with Doc and his instruction initially with Jay and Jezebel, because there were certainly times where they were expecting, okay, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and Doc is like, okay, I'm going to tell you a story and that's going to be it, or I need you to go do this task, and it's going to seem menial, but it's really not. And I think like that was one of the, as you're talking about ground, like learning the basics and learning, like you got to start really at the bottom, especially with them who Jay and Jezebel, 11 years old, they don't know anything about it, and they've got to like just start really square one of, here's where root magic or root work is, and here's where we are starting you off at.
Right. And I think that's with a lot of things, regardless of what it is you're learning, whether it's a new career or a craft or a musical instrument. You learn from the bottom up. You learn the basics first before you then venture off. And that's part of the learning process, I think, in the book.
One of the things that I found fascinating, and it's something that as I've gotten older, I've come to realize is really important is something that Jezebel does as she's learning Root, and that is taking notes and writing down things because uh, as Doc had said, a lot of it's passed down verbally through just teaching, instructing through just conversation. A lot of it's based on just watching it and doing it, and Jezebel's taking notes and writing down stuff. And I find that as I'm getting older, I'm realizing that a lot of stories, like even within my family and like family history, because they were told as stories but never written down, as like my grandparents have passed away, it's definitely something where I'm reflecting on, wow, I really wish that we had written these stories down or recorded these stories. And I find that with Jezebel, especially her taking those notes, it's like she's getting that knowledge, and she's making sure that it will continue on
Yes,
for the future.
yes, and it's an incredibly important thing that she does because she's not told to do it. She takes it upon herself to go, no, I'm going to get a notebook and I'm going to record this and I'm going to I'll have it to refer back to. And I'm sure in your watching of movies and reading of books that you're aware that enslaved people were not allowed to learn how to read and write. It was illegal to teach enslaved people how to read and write. So much of why our stories were word of mouth was they had to be. And the people who were, let's say, holders of those stories, in the retelling, we've all had stories that change every time you tell them. And it's just, to me, amazing that so many of these traditions have survived, looking at where they've come from across oceans. Through time, animals, plants, flowers go extinct or change because of environmental concerns or soil conditions. So, root work through all of that, even though it's had to morph and had to change in order to survive, it still endures, which is something that I find amazing and fascinating.
I know, and you mentioned that your grandmother uh, did Root, and you did you learn alongside? Like, do you have that background? Is it something that you practice, or is it something that you like just have the stories about? Like,
It's something that my great aunt practiced. I grew up
okay,
in a household where I had pretty much half my family were root workers, and the other half didn't want anything to do with it. So I sort of grew up in this with this really sort of odd push pull kind of thing, very similar to what Jess and Jay endure in the book, which is their mother wants them to go to school, get good grades so that they can get good jobs and have good lives. And their Uncle Doc is telling them, well, you can still learn root work too. It's part of your heritage, it's part of who you are, and you can do those two things simultaneously. So that's very similar to how I grew up, with some people wanting to teach me things and other people saying, well, no, you need to just study your schoolwork. And I think a lot of people in root work tradition that are my age from my part of the world probably experience similar situations because there's this diversion of people, even within family and within group working communities, that don't see the value of it. And to a certain extent, also don't see the value of holding on to Gullah as a language, um, preserving where we've been. So, did I learn all of that? Yes. Do I practice currently? I don't practice. I do some things, but I don't practice as a this is something that I open myself up to the community to do, like Doc does, with having a
hmm
store and making potions for people and doing things for people. That isn't my calling. I know people who that is their calling, but it isn't. It isn't mine. This is my calling, which is being a griot and scribing and writing and recording. That is what I do.
one of the questions I had: how did you get from where you were to root magic, as far as, did it always start off as like a middle grade book? Because that, I know that that's what it's geared towards, is like 8 to 12 year olds, like three grades, like 3 to 7, give or take. I'd probably put it as like a fifth grade ish book, just because of some of the themes that are in there. But where, like, what was the evolution of root magic from start to where it ended up as?
That is a long story. I will condense it down a bit. I have written short stories most of my writing life, and because when you're in a career or even a hobby, if writing is your hobby, at some point you want to branch out and try different things and see if there's something else that appeals to you. And because I considered myself a short story writer, I thought, well, maybe one day I should just challenge myself to write a novel. But it seemed like a very daunting thing because coming from a short story background where I could say what I wanted to say in 5,000 words or less, writing over 50,000 words seemed like just this almost unachievable goal. It just seemed outside of my realm. So I thought, well, you know what? Let's sign up for NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, which is in November every year. And you sign up for it and you basically write 50,000 words in 30 days. There's some parameters as far as your minimums, but pretty much as long as you come out with 50,000 words at the end of the 30 days, it really doesn't matter what you get done on what day. So as I was writing, I ended up writing individual short stories involving the same family and same characters because coming up with a full character arc and all of that at one time just seemed like too much to do. So I ended those 30 days with a collection of short stories. And I, after the fact, went back and wrote connecting sections to connect the short stories to each other. So I didn't start out with a novel at all. I started out with a collection of short stories. And over time, I ended up writing to connect them and writing to put them together into a singular narrative.
That is really cool, because I mean, I've not, of people that I've talked to or books that I've read, like, I like the concept of what you did with the many short stories and then connecting them. That's such a fabulous idea. Like, work. I mean, you get the short stories, you start developing the characters, and then you can bridge it all and smooth it out, and then make it into like a cohesive story. That is, I love it. That's
Oh,
cool.
thank you. I don't know that I could do that again. I think now the expectation is now you've written a book, now you've done it once. You're going to have to sort of just figure it out again. But first time through, yes, absolutely fine.
Now, what was it always geared towards, middle grade?
I didn't originally, when I conceptualized the characters appear in a short story that's for adults, that's in my first collection of Southern Gothic horror stories, which is called Spooklights, Southern Gothic Horror. So these characters originally appeared in that short story, but it was a short story that was written for adults. It certainly isn't one that I would want kids to read. It's certainly not canon within the Root Magic universe. I just happened to like the characters and I wanted to do something different with them. So it's completely unrelated. Um, and I ended up writing Root Magic and not really thinking about what my end goal was. And during the process of deciding that, do I want to do traditional publishing? Do I want to self publish? Do I want to seek a small press? That was when I had to sort of face the question of we've got this collection of short stories. We're going to write to sort of connect it all. What are we doing here? Are we doing a book that's for younger readers? Are we doing a book that's for adult readers but has kids as protagonists? So I had to look at it from that point before seeking representation and before seeking publication. Because a lot of times the big question for publishers, um, I don't know if this is something your listeners would be interested in. The big question for publishers is, where are we going to slot this book on the shelves, whether it's physical shelves or virtual shelves? So a lot of people say, well, I don't think about that before I write. Um, and I'll let somebody else sort that out. One of the big questions you get asked very early on in the process, if you're going for publishing with a small press or even for traditional publishing, is where is this book going to fit? Because they have schedules of this many books for this age group, this many books for this genre. So they're going to want to quantify your book. Even if you don't want to quantify it while you're writing it, they want to know, where does your book fit? So that was a question that I had to answer really early on. And I had to tackle that from um, a selling the book point of view, but also from a revision point of view. So the voice needs to be different. How the characters respond needs to be a little bit different. So that was where I decided, I do want to do a book for kids, because so often, as I mentioned earlier, kids formulate opinions fairly early on in life. A lot of that is from family, a lot of that is from media. And I wanted to be able to write a book that's for younger kids, because so much of how we formulate empathy and how we interact with other people, that's formed when we're kids. And this book it's a Southern book, it's a Gullah-Geechee book, but it's an adventure story. It's still a story about family and trying to find friends and being brave and tackling monsters and challenging situations where you're scared and you don't know what to do, but you know you have to do something. And those are universal things. And I think younger readers seeing Southern kids and Southern Gullah-Geechee kids in a story that they can relate to builds empathy. And I think that we've all seen movies and read books where Southerners, just from the sheer portrayal of someone having a Southern accent, that's shorthand, and you're supposed to immediately get that that person is uneducated or undereducated or backward or slow. And I wanted to put something on the other side of the scale to contradict that narrative.
I'm over here nodding. No one can see me because this is audio, but I'm over here nodding. And one of the things that you had mentioned, because we've focused a lot on the root side of things with the Turners, but they also have to deal with what's going on in like their time period of 1963. And I'd written down like Sheriff Edwards and Deputy Collins just as a note for myself, because like their world is not just the world of root, but is the world of the United States and what is going on at that time period. And like the difference between the two characters isn't like it is night and day, but it's something that the Turner family have to deal with, not only with that, but with school. And they talk about school integration
Mhm.
in the bigger cities. It's not in where they are at that time period, but it's definitely something where they're not just experiencing what's going on in the root side, but with what is actually going on that they're dealing with day to day in just living.
Oh, absolutely. And, none of us is really completely in a vacuum. And we deal with the things that happen within our household. Then we have to deal with things that possibly happen maybe within our extended family or possibly within whatever our jobs are. And then you look at the bigger parts of what's happening in the country, what's happening in the world. And then the people that you interact with day to day that aren't your direct family, they're still interacting with you, having brought in whatever they're carrying on their shoulders from their individual families and for their individual experiences. So no one's really sort of living in that sort of insular bubble. We're all affected by everything that goes on around us and everything that goes on in the world around us. And that's what the Turners have to deal with. They have to deal with their own personal situations. They have to deal with 1963, just this huge pivotal year for the civil rights movement, extreme changes in laws and regulations. Um, just a lot happens in that year that people have to deal with that they haven't had to deal with before. And things are changing and people are responding in different ways. Some people are responding because of fear, some people are responding because of um, anticipation of maybe changes that they've been looking forward to. But then sometimes there's also that duality of you're excited about changes that might be positive for you, but you're afraid of how other people around you might respond to those changes and see those as negative. And you have to interact with those people as well. And someone mentioned to me that if you didn't say that root magic was in 1963, so much of what happens in the book could be happening now. And I think that's true. You look at what's gone on in the world in the past, in 2020, or so far in 2021. Yeah, a lot of those things possibly could be happening in some way, shape, or form happening now. But 1963 was just a year of a great deal of change, not only in the South, but in the United States in general. And I wanted to capture that in the book. It's also a time when my mother was doing a lot of social work, and I was able to sort of talk with her about things and get her own personal experience and sort of filter that with my own experience and add that to the book as well.
Hmm. So we have root magic. I got it in my hand. I'm holding on to it. I think when I started reading it, I started tweeting out. I was like, I'm into the book. Like it's already got me. And then there's a point where I said I just got to finish it. I had reached the halfway point, and I said, okay,
Mm.
I'm halfway in. I got to get to the end. And then I shot you a message on Messenger. I was like, I love this book. It's so great. And of course, one of my questions is, especially with a book like this, and I don't I don't think you have an answer at this point, but I fell in love with the characters. I fell in love with the setting of where they are and who they are, and I want more, Eden. I want more. I want more root magic.
I would love to write more. I'm currently working on other things right now. Nobody's asked me for more at this point, other than you, of course. Um, but I love the Turners. They are people that I know, you know, and these are characters that are near and dear to my heart. And when creating them, they're bits and pieces of people that I've heard tell stories and I've heard say things I've heard that have taught me things. And I absolutely adore them. And I would love to write more about them at some point, and hopefully I'll get a chance to do that in the future.
I'm going to cross my fingers and do whatever I need to do to make that happen. I don't know what that actually is. Like if I have to start a root magic fan club or a podcast where I talk about root magic for like 5 minutes every day and force people to listen to me. Um, but I really love what you have given to the world. Um, I really love that not only did you give it to the world, but that you were able to put you and your family and your ancestry and culture into this book, because I know that it's sorely missing from a lot of the works that like that I read or that my kids read or that people are exposed to. And I love that it is out there for people to have and to get to know. And even if it's just something where they read the book and then they Google something or they research more
Mm,
into the history and culture, I think it's something that gives them that entry point, and it's like a good entry point to get into rather than the what's been put out there previously in media.
right. Well, I thank you so much for reading it. I'm so glad that you loved it. And if you decide to start that Root Magic fan club, invite me.
For people who are listening, if it like I know that I'm sure there's a lot of fire, like a lot of things in the fire or things that you're working on. Is there something we should start looking forward to, or is it just we'll see what comes out when it comes out at this point?
My next book, which is with my editor currently, is another magical middle grade story. The book that I'm working on right now, actually, I'm working on two separate works in process right now. I'm not sure why I'm doing that to myself, but I'm working on another middle grade, which is more of a mystery, and I'm trying my hand next at a YA. I haven't written YA before, but hopefully this will go well. I hadn't written middle grade before Root Magic, so hopefully this YA venture will go well also.
Awesome. Well, I certainly hope when they come out, you come back and we can talk about that, because I'll be right there to buy whatever is coming out so I can read it.
You know I will. I'm happy to be invited on the podcast. I always have a great time catching up with you and chattering on about all of the stuff I'm working on, but also reminiscing about D&D days, even though that doesn't ever make it quite to this podcast, but anytime.
For people who are listening and they want to find you out there on the great wide world of the internet, what are the best places to do so, Eden?
My website is edenroyce.com. I need to do a little bit of a better job about updating it for events, but fingers crossed I will be doing that in 2021. I'm on Twitter at Eden Royce, and I'm also on Instagram at Eden Royce Books. But that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. If anybody does want to do that, is via my website contact form, or occasionally you might see me chattering about something on Twitter, talking about probably books of other people's that I'm looking forward to reading.
I will have the links to your website and social media on the show notes and website and Facebook page, as well as a link to go pick up Root Magic, along with a link for your other works. So that way people can possibly check those out as well. And Eden, I just want to say again, thank you. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for Root Magic. And thanks for being who you are, because I love getting to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It was absolutely my pleasure, David.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.